Are you sick of scrolling through Netflix and Hulu searching for movies that are high quality and family friendly? Christian Cinema has thousands of movies available on demand that you can watch anytime, anywhere. When you sign up for a giving membership, a premium offering from Christian Cinema, you can watch 5 free movies every month. Learn more about becoming a giving member at givingcompany.com/giving membership and start watching great movies today. The other side of the road is safe, where we sidestep being bothered and avoid getting involved. But rolling up your sleeves and boldly going where few dare to tread, that's walking through Samaria. Each week on our podcast, we introduce you to the special few who walk in the spirit of the Good Samaritan. On behalf of the Giving Company and your hosts, David Hendrickson and Dan Riveros, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. This is your host, David Hendrickson, and my co-host, Dan Riveros, is actually in the studio, but we are having some audio technical difficulties, and we may actually have some equipment default. And so Dan is here physically and in spirit, but you won't be hearing from him today, which I know you'll be disappointed, but we have a great conversation. Dan just said hello to everybody, and I'm still going to have some fun with him as we go through this podcast. I am really excited to introduce to all of our listeners Debbie Causey from North Point Ministries. Debbie, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Debbie is probably, what do you think, Debbie? 2 miles away? Something like that?
Yes.
Maybe 2 to 3 miles? So just right down the road from our offices is the North Point main campus in Alpharetta, Georgia, where Debbie works. But she's coming to us via Zoom, which, Dan, I don't know, we've probably done a third of these podcasts, maybe a little bit more, certainly in the last couple of years with COVID on Zoom. But Debbie, you sound great, and I know our listeners are going to be super excited to hear from you. If you don't mind, I'm going to start by reading your bio, and then we are going to dive right in.
Okay, sounds good.
For 24 years, Debbie Causey has been the director of care at North Point Ministries, a licensed professional counselor, and an ordained minister. Ministries under her leadership include divorce, addiction, financial and grief recovery, as well as ministries for marriage, personal growth, and a ministry for parents of LGBTQ+ individuals. One of her desires in ministry is for all believers to live a life of freedom in Christ. Being the mother of a gay son, one of her greatest passions is to minister to the LGBTQ+ community, sharing with them Jesus' incredible love and acceptance for them, and to teach parents how to love their LGBTQ+ children well. She has developed and written curriculum to facilitate this life change and is in the process of writing a book. She has been married to her husband, Al, for 33 years, mom to 4 wonderful children, mom-in-law to 3, and Noni to Beckett and Emsley, with 2 more on the way. She enjoys traveling and spending time with her family. Debbie, again, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Thank you. I think that just about does it.
Nice. That's good. Well, you and I definitely share the traveling and spending time with family. So yeah. I'm sure you've been to some great places. We may talk about that a little bit later. We have to start, Debbie, though. My co-host, Dan, who is seen but not heard, is going to roll his eyes because I think most podcasts, if not all, we have woven in college athletics some way. So we are in the middle of March Madness. I think this is our first recording since Black History Month, Dan, if I've got that correct. And from the state of Georgia, we had only one representative in the pool of 64, and it happened to be your alma mater, Georgia State. So did you follow the Panthers at all in that one and done game that they had?
Not at all. I wish I could say yes, but I am still proud that they were there for a short period. Probably
a good decision, yeah, because they did make it, which is better than we can say for the Georgia Bulldogs, for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, for Georgia Southern, whoever else. Georgia State made it, so you can stand on that. So I'm guessing you're from Georgia, but I don't know that entirely or for sure. Tell our listeners, if you don't mind, a little bit about life growing up as Debbie.
Yeah, so I grew up in the North. So
wow.
I'm kind of surprised you thought I grew up in Georgia.
It was the Georgia State thing.
I have a thick accent. I grew up in Ohio, Wisconsin, eventually South Carolina, where I went to Clemson University, very much a Tiger. And then we moved to Georgia after I got married. So yeah, we've been in Georgia for, 20 some years, but not growing up there. So,
well, yeah. Clemson is near and dear to our heart for sure. So they, certainly, I think they're the national champions in college soccer and obviously formidable in football. So good for you. Can you maybe kind of give us the faith journey for you, kind of growing up? Like, how did that happen? You wound up an ordained minister.
Yes. So I grew up in a very loving, I'll say religious home, because I think a Christian home is very different than a religious home. But it was very loving. It was Baptist. It was conservative. Wasn't Southern Fried Baptist because I was in the North. So I guess they call them independent Baptist churches up there.
Gotcha.
And I loved everything about church. I loved sword drills. I loved Awana. I loved FCA. I loved youth group. I mean, if the doors were open, I was there. I was kind of a bit of a goody two shoes, if we still use that term, if it's people still know what that means. And even though I was really, really popular and a cheerleader, I still did things like had Bible studies at lunch, and people would come, and my friends would call me a Jesus freak, but fortunately I have a bit of a stronger personality, so I could navigate
Good for
that.
you.
But
yeah.
I had a relationship with God from a very early age, becoming a Christian at 5, and then really never straying from it, and really not having it shaken until more recently.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my faith journey. And then when I started working at the church, because I pastor people and because I have my graduate degree in counseling, they ordained me as a pastor here. So that's how that happened.
That's awesome.
That's exciting.
Wow. Good for you. Tell us a little bit about how you leaned into becoming a licensed professional counselor. I mean, that you're kind of signing up for dealing with tough stuff, right? How did that path sort of unfold for you?
So it's sort of atypical in that in 7th grade, I loved listening to people talk about what they were going through, and people would mention, hey, you're a really good listener, or you give great advice. And so that's when I decided, okay, this is the route I'm going to take. And interestingly enough, most people don't have this experience. I never wavered. I kept going in that direction. I remember in my internship, which is probably the hardest part of getting your license in counseling, I think.
Yeah.
Because you're working a ton and you're still going to school, and, it's just rough. And I remember thinking, I'm starting to do some counseling as part of it, and thinking, oh my goodness, these individuals, they don't just come with one problem. I'm only prepared for them to come with one problem.
Yeah, right.
Their whole lives are falling apart. Like it's 8 problems. It's every area of their life is touched. So I thought, do I want to do this? I mean, I've already gone to all my school, so it would kind of be a waste to bail at this point. So that probably has a lot to do with why I am at the church rather than in a private practice doing this, 6 days a week, all day long. I get a little more success than that. But I still love that I am a counselor. I still love doing my continuing ed and getting to do some counseling that I get to do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's been, I think, almost 24 years with North Point Ministries. How do you, when you look back on over 2 decades with North Point Ministries, what context do you put it in? How would you describe that history and that experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of years. I've actually been here. Yeah, the church is 26 years old. I've actually been here since the beginning, but we moved away for a year. So that's why it's 24. But we came from First Baptist of Atlanta when Andy started the church here. And I started in preschool, believe it or not. My kids were little. I have 4 kids, as you heard. And so when they were little, I started with preschool. Then I became the director of Upstreet, which is our elementary age kids. And I was doing graduate school at the time. So I switched over to care ministry and started with premarital. And then one by one, the ministry started coming under me, which now there's 12. So
oh my gosh,
it's wonderful. And I'm the director of care at North Point, but also all the campuses.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love my job still. There's a ton of variety, ton of stuff to do. But yeah, that's how it kind of progressed.
We've had Sam Collier on. Sam was at North Point for a little bit of time. Give our listeners, because I think sometimes we blow by this, Debbie, just those of us here in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is a suburb to the north of the city, everybody knows North Point because it's this very large campus, kind of right in the heart of Alpharetta, right? I guess it's a little bit east of downtown, and it's not quite to Johns Creek. These are all terms that only mean things to us here in Alpharetta. Sorry, listeners. But tell our listeners, Debbie, just the size and scope of North Point. How many campuses, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's funny because I am not a numbers person. So we have 7 campuses. We have multiple partner churches, which some of them play Andy, some of them don't. I don't have a clue. I'd say we have about 30,000 people, but that's probably very wrong. That is probably.
But the 7.
We'll go back and look and edit that in. I don't know.
The 7.
It's a lot of people. I know that.
The 7 campuses are largely the greater Atlanta area, right? There's Woodstock. There's Buckhead, there's Brownsbridge, there's Gwinnett, Decatur. Yeah.
East
so
Cobb. Yeah.
That's right. So for our listeners, kind of the greater Atlanta area, I mean, there's a North Point church in a lot of the major kind of urban and suburban areas of the city, which is pretty awesome. So what does it mean, Debbie, to, there's 12 tracks, there's 12 areas under the director of care, the care ministry. Talk a little bit about, your scope, staff, and how busy you are. It sounds like a huge responsibility with that number of ministries or initiatives under it.
Yeah. And the pandemic did not help with that. I had several friends on staff that didn't have a lot to do during the pandemic because everything shut down and our job just ramped up. And so, you heard in the bio, we have everything from, money management to divorce to marriage, premarital, funerals, parenting LGBT kids. Those are some of the ministries that fall under care. And each of those ministries has volunteers that we lead. So Renew, for example, which is like our life mentoring, it's probably got about 150 volunteers that mentor people on life. And so I get to work with a staff of really, really incredibly talented people that care for people so well, and then manage those volunteers. So I'm really, really blessed to have the job that I have. But at the same time, I get to teach. I get to write curriculum. I get to do things like this, which I love.
Yeah.
And I also get to brainstorm ways to draw people into our church, because care is a way to draw people into church, because people are always in pain, which is not something I get excited about, but I do get excited that they turn to the church when they do have a care need, and we, can meet that need most of the time, or at least connect them to a way to meet it. And oftentimes they'll end up going to church here because they felt like somebody cared about them. So I love that part.
That's great. You mentioned COVID.
Yeah.
And gosh, not just COVID, but you can think about what's going on in society today. Certainly some of it is COVID related, but my guess is depression is on the rise. Oh, yeah. Anxiety is on the rise.
Yeah.
I would venture to say that maybe financial challenges are on the rise. Inflation, that kind of thing. COVID, people being out of work. What do you, if you had a top, I don't know, 2 or 3, what do you think are the biggest issues that people and families are struggling with right now from the perspective of your care ministry?
I think I can't limit it to 2 or 3. I would limit it to like 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some that you didn't mention that might surprise people, marriage trouble.
Yeah.
I think marriage trouble was already there. It just brought it to the surface because you were having to spend all this time together.
Sure. That's right.
And your problems were just showing up.
Yep.
Addiction skyrocketed. People that would normally maybe have a glass of wine at dinner were having 2 or 3 at dinner.
Yeah. Or at lunch, right? Or at lunch.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Don't forget about that.
Right.
And then grief is another one that you didn't mention.
Yeah.
But there were so many losses. There was loss of life, but there was loss of a lot of other things and isolation. So grief has been something that is almost Rick Warren referred to it as a tsunami of grief because we had all these different storms happening at the same time. And any one of those storms by itself, whether it was a financial storm or it was a virus, like what's the word I'm looking for? Like infirmity.
Yeah.
Any one of those storms that we had would have caused enough grief. But because we had so many different ones, we had racial injustice, we had social instability, we had political issues, so much of it. Put together is just that tsunami of grief. So grief was huge. And then, I just mentioned race and LGBT stuff, and then suicidal youth, especially, depression went up like, I want to say 3 times for youth, and anxiety quadrupled. So we have a lot, and the counselors are not seeing new clients right now. Let's just put it that way.
They're full.
I have a very hard
Their
time.
dockets are full. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Many practices are full. So.
Wow. That is a lot. Well, we're going to take one of these areas of the care ministry that's deeply personal to you, and we are going to wander down that road. You mentioned your faith being shaken recently, I think going back to 2014. But before we go there, we have some mutual friends, and I just want to do some shout outs to some mutual friends. So Karen Stubbs is a mutual friend. So I heard from Karen yesterday when she heard you were going to be on the Walking Through Samaria podcast. We've talked to Karen before, and her Birds on a Wire ministry to mothers is a thriving ministry. They're actually in the same building, Dan, that you and I are in here in Alpharetta. So shout out to Karen. We also have a mutual friend in Marion Edmonds Allen, and love Marion to death. Marion has been on this podcast somewhat recently, Dan. I'm trying to think. I don't know. 3 or 4 months ago, something like that. But she's been to Alpharetta. I think she's met with you. She's met with us. She's just a dear, dear friend and somebody that I met through crazy circumstances, and she's just a delight. And then I think you know Carla White. Do you know Carla White?
I do.
So,
she works here.
Yeah. So Carla is one of our authors. She co-authored Spirit Calling, which is one of our latest publications from our iDisciple publishing label. And you can't go to North Point with probably having a much longer list than that. But those are 3 that certainly come to mind and are at the very top of mutual friends of ours. So I thought we'd give them a little shout out, Debbie, before we go further.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Karen's my best friend. She actually helped me with some of the questions you asked because she is kind of a fly by the seat of her pants type of a girl, and I am not. So I'm like, I don't know what he's asking. So
that's awesome.
Funny. She
That's
helped
great.
me out.
That's good. We love Karen. She's right upstairs on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think. So she's not here today, but otherwise we can go bug her anytime we want. So as I mentioned, we're going to get deeply personal. You talked about your faith being shaken in 2014. You have started to write a book, as you mentioned in your bio, and the name or the title of that book, as I understand it, is called The Big Reveal. So would you mind telling our listeners what the big reveal was?
Yes, I will. And hopefully I can do this without getting emotional, because this is so near and dear to my heart. But the big reveal is really a memoir, and it is a memoir of the journey of my son coming out as gay and what God taught me all throughout that journey. It's almost 8 years now. I can't believe it's been that long. But the whole 8 years has been a journey of God opening my eyes to things, showing me things, allowing me to go down paths that I don't want to go down, and having to reconcile things like my faith and things like that. But the majority of the book, the big reveal, is I don't want to give away the end, because I'd love for people to read it. When
Exactly.
It does come out.
That's right. That's right.
But yes. But God revealed something huge to me in the end. We'll just put it that way. After my son came out and being on that journey. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what it is. It's the journey.
Well, to our listeners, I have read the draft of the manuscript, and, Debbie, it's really good. I mean, I love how, frankly, deeply personal it is. And I think you're very transparent in terms of your experience and what you learned as a mom, what your family experienced, your journey with Noah, et cetera. This is probably going to be the toughest question that I ask you during this podcast, but again, without giving away the entirety of the book, can you maybe share with our listeners what's the biggest thing you've learned about parenting since 2014?
Yeah. These, I don't know if you ever talk about Enneagram on this.
Oh, we sure have. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm a 1. So when you ask me questions like, what is the biggest thing you've learned?
Yeah, you have 4.
Really
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So I'll do my best. But I kind of see my life as, before and after. So before 2014, I was buttoned up. I was, like I said, a good Christian girl. I was a perfectionist, spiritually mature, I thought. I felt like I had a lot of things figured out. Things were black and white. I had a category, especially for what a gay person looked like and what that involved. And it wasn't great. It was not a great category. And so after 2014, when my son came out, my son is so loving. He's so introverted. He's so people pleasing and moral. So when he came out, it shattered every category I had for a gay person, because I thought they were loud. I thought they had an agenda. I thought, they were living the life of sin, the lifestyle, I should say, of sin, because that word is very popular. And so when he came out, he was sobbing in the chair and a half next to me. And he just said, "Mom, I'm gay." And I honestly thought at first, is this a joke? Because my family is very likes to joke around, but he's sobbing at this point, so that couldn't have
probably
been
not, right?
And
Yeah,
probably not.
Probably not.
And honestly, when he said these words of, I've prayed for God to take this away, he's crying as he's saying it. And he's like, he won't change me. I've asked him. I've been trying for 4 years and he won't do it. And why did he make me this way? And honestly, it was so severe. I felt like I was going to throw up. I felt like if I did throw up, that would have been the worst thing that I could have done. And this is where I get really transparent in the book. And most people, I don't know if I guess they don't get this transparent. But honestly, for other parents that go through this, I just felt like it was important for me to be real and explain what it was like. But it shattered everything. So for me, the most important thing, if I had to whittle it down to one, is how sacrificial unconditional love truly is. It's not this ooey gooey, easy thing. It's messy. It's hard. You have to put other people's needs before your own and really get your own support from other people other than your children, which is really hard to do. Parents look to their kids all the time to get that emotional support. And with this, you can't do that, or you could have a suicidal kid on your hand.
Right.
So
right.
Sacrificial, unconditional love is probably what I've learned the most about. And interestingly, I learned it from a group of people that I never would have thought I would have learned it from. So I think I would have to say that was a key thing. And then the other thing I think is before 2014, fear was a huge motivator of my life. I responded to fear in so many ways. I worried about having misbehaved children. I worried about my kids not believing in God. I worried about being the perfect parent, the perfect mom, the perfect wife. That one is a perfectionist. So I constantly was worried and had anxiety about all of those things. And it did no good. It helped me very little because I ended up with two very traumatic situations and that were completely out of my control. And one of my kids more than likely doesn't believe, in God anymore as a result of that. So a lot of good that fear did for me. So I've chosen now to, instead of live my life out of fear, live my life out of love.
That's great.
And it's a much better journey.
That's a good one. One of the things that I picked up in the book, Debbie, and I actually talked to my team, not about your book this morning, but about this concept, and that is what it looks like to be helpful. And I'm just going to use first names here. I hope that's okay. But you called out people like Amy and Aaron in the book that you either turned to or they came to serve you. Can with maybe those names as a backdrop, what does it look like to help and not hurt in a situation like this?
Well, I would say this is probably true of most situations. Being a counselor and sitting through a lot of hard journeys, I think this is probably true, but it definitely is true in this situation, is give people your presence.
It's good.
Not necessarily your words.
Yeah.
But give people your presence, without shame and judgment. Sit with them, let them cry, let them feel what they're feeling, and don't try to put a bow on it. One of the worst things we can do when somebody's, loses somebody to death is to say, well, God is in control. That's terrible. It might be true, but it's terrible to say to somebody that's grieving.
That's right.
And, in this world, in this LGBTQ plus world, the parents are grieving a lot of the times. And so saying things like God is in control, or, I just love the sinner and hate the sin, and some of the other things people would say, it really, really scarred deep. So Aaron and Amy, they were just so great about, God was not surprised by this, which really, really touched me. God has entrusted your family with this story. That really, really meant a lot to me. And then just the lack of shame and the lack of judgment as we were grieving was so helpful. It was so helpful.
That's good. I have a favorite chapter of the book in its current form. I realize it could change through editing and the like, but right now it's chapter 8. It might be chapter something else by the time it comes out. But your title of that chapter is "You Don't Have to Choose." Can you elaborate on what that means? You don't have to choose.
Yeah. So many parents. Like I said, we have a ministry here called Parent Connect. I guess it's okay to mention that at North Point Ministry Churches for parents of LGBT kids. And the majority of the parents come to us thinking they have to choose between their faith and the love for their child. And I am here to say, and I say in this chapter, you do not have to choose between the two.
Yeah,
Jesus didn't choose. We don't have to choose. And I don't really know where we got that from. I think it may be that fear part of us going down a slippery slope or not telling our kids the truth as we know it. but you don't have to choose. You do have to kind of come to terms with what your theology is on this subject. And you didn't have to do that before. You didn't have to study the 6 verses that seem to talk about this. And you didn't have to have a theological position. And we certainly encourage parents to do that in their relationship with God, figuring that out. But there's a lot of things that are gray that I once thought were so black and white. But in the end, you do not have to choose between your faith and loving your
I just
your
love
kids.
that. That's such a great statement. As Debbie, as we wind down here a little bit, I've got a couple more questions. I want to chat about the book and the future of the book and that kind of thing. But first, our listeners are used to hearing me say this. This podcast was born out of the collaboration between Christian leaders and Muslim leaders in Ethiopia in serving kids and rescuing kids. And it prompted Dan and I to kind of go down this path of researching the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10. And frankly, how profound it is that the Samaritan is the hero of the story. Because at the time, obviously, Jesus was Jewish, and Jews and Samaritans were religiously, culturally, ethnically, racially at odds with one another. And significantly, right? Like the Christians in Beirut, the Irish and the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland, at odds with one another. And making the Samaritan the hero of the story, I think, was Jesus prompting us to say, it's not just enough to serve people. You got to serve people that haven't walked in your shoes and wouldn't be seen as similar to you, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can take all sorts of correlations to that. It might be people of different religions, people of different economic levels. It might be people of different races, et cetera. In this particular arena of the LGBTQ plus community, how can we be good Samaritans, or at least better Samaritans, in serving people of the LGBTQ plus community?
Oh, there's just so many ways. The LGBTQ plus community is 86% grew up in the faith community. So these are our people. Even though the best response is to be a missionary and study the language, study the history, study the culture, study what triggers them, study what accommodates for them. There are people, there are kids. And so the worst response would be to exclude them or to marginalize them or to allow them to feel that they're not wanted and that they don't belong. 96% of these kids prayed for God to take it away. Whether it's gay or trans, they prayed for God to take it away. And this was not a Christian study that they did in this book called Us Versus Us.
Wow.
By Andrew Marin. They did this very, very large study, and 96%, and this includes atheists, it includes everyone, prayed for God to take it away. So this is not something that they would not unchoose if they could, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
And so to allow them to feel like they're not wanted and that they don't belong and to exclude them is one of the worst things that we can do to this group of people. And that's very true of my son. When he came out, he said that he kept it a secret because he didn't want us to treat him any differently than we did prior to him coming out.
Sure.
And I'd say that the majority of the LGBT community would say the same thing, because they've seen often the church's response or their family's response to them coming out as being very, very negative.
Right.
And so that would be the worst. The best thing we could do is to allow them to be known, but also to be loved. My favorite quote lately is from Tim Keller. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I'd love to read it if that's okay.
Please, yeah.
He says, to be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. So in other words, people know us, but they don't love what they know. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. And that is what we need more than anything. And I think that's so true of all of us, but especially true of these modern day, I guess, as you talk about the Good Samaritan, these modern day people that need to be loved and known. Known and then still loved. And Jesus was so good at this.
That's right. That's so good.
He ate with people that are marginalized. He loved them. And, he would share truth, but it was not the majority of what he was doing. And it was never out of shame or condemnation.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
So that's what I would say are the ways that we can respond.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sure our listeners are going to wonder, what the prospects are for the book. Can you give us a sense as to what's happening there?
Yeah, so it's just gone through what's called content evaluation, I guess, and the next part is designing the cover and things like that. So it's going to be here fairly soon. I'd say in the next couple of months.
That's great.
Yeah, and I'm just really excited about it. Having the possibility of keeping other parents and ministry leaders from making the same mistakes that I made along the way. So if I think about what do I hope for the book, that would be what I would hope for it. But hopefully it'll be out in the next couple of months.
That's great.
Hopefully it will help people. That's my greatest desire, is just to help other people whose kids are coming out or they haven't come out yet. And they can not make those mistakes.
Is it going to still be called The Big Reveal? Is that the title?
Yes,
okay.
It is. It's still called The Big Reveal, and it's called, there's a subline of loving your LGBTQ plus child while strengthening your faith. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, keep an eye out for The Big Reveal, all of our listeners. Sounds like it's going to hit the shelves relatively soon. So I'm sure people are going to want to get their hands on it. Last question, Debbie, if you don't mind, and this is kind of a summary question. That Dan knows this. I very often take the least common denominator of conversations and facts and those kinds of things. And so my least common denominator declaration is that people right now are dealing with some major stuff. How's that for a spiritual declaration? So people are dealing with major stuff. You are a licensed professional counselor. You've been doing care ministry for decades. You've got real experience as a parent. We didn't talk about, category B that you've also been dealing with your daughter.
Right.
You have had a lot of exposure, let's say, to your own stuff and people dealing with major stuff. Can you leave our listeners with just a little bit of your wisdom on how do you deal with major stuff in your life?
I have dealt with a lot of stuff, and there are always people that have dealt with more stuff than I have. And the reality is there's a lot of people in pain right now. So calling it stuff feels general, but the great news is there's so many different things people are dealing with. We couldn't name them all. But the key thing that I try to remember is that God wants to be near us as we go through that stuff. And I have a scripture, if I can share it, Philippians 4:5-7. Most people, don't include the first verse, but I think it's really important. It says, "Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And the reason I love that verse so much is not because it says, do not be anxious about anything, because tons of people take that as it's a sin to be anxious. And I totally disagree with that. I don't think that is what that verse is talking about at all.
Right.
I think it's saying God is near, and when you're anxious, tell him about that. Let him go through that with you. Let him be beside you. And as a result of that, you will have peace. So I think it's a given you're going to have anxiety. And so drawing near to God in those moments are going to be what help us get through those times, because those times do shake our faith. They shook my faith when my son went through what he is going through. So, and when my daughter went through what she went through. And so knowing that God is next to me, and sometimes carrying me, I know that's an old symbolism there, but it really means a lot to know I am not alone. People need to know you are not alone. And not only are you loved by me, but you are loved by God. And if we really understood the love, that perfect love, we would not need to be afraid.
Well, Debbie, that is an incredible, incredible answer and incredible response. And I want to thank you so much for being a part of today's discussion. Congratulations on the book. And thank you so much for sharing your heart and your wisdom and your perspective from your own personal experience, as well as being the director of care ministry at North Point Ministries for so long. That's it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. This is your host, David Henriksen. I promise Dan Riveros is in the room. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much for joining.
For more content like this, visit us at givingcompany.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Walking Through Samaria.